The instant he looked at me from across that polished oak table, I felt it. The cold certainty that something was wrong. His eyes were no longer the same as they once were, softening when I entered the room now. They were observing me as one might analyze an object, measuring every gesture, every word. And, for the first time in 20 years, I realized I was no longer his wife. I was an obstacle, a signature he needed, a problem he planned to quietly erase. It all started with whispers, subtle hints that I was tired, distracted, or forgetting things. First I laughed. I thought it was a sign of care. But beware, it doesn't come with locked drawers. Not even with appointments scheduled in secret. Not even with her own husband talking to doctors behind her back. What he didn't know was that I was already watching as well. Sometimes the worst betrayals don't come as explosions. They seep in silently, drop by drop, until the day you wake up and realize that your reality has been rewritten, word by word, by someone you trusted. They say money changes people. But it went beyond mere greed. It was about power. He wanted to erase me from the house, from the bills, from the future. And he almost succeeded. Almost. Have you ever felt what it's like to have someone tell you that your own mind isn't reliable? Have you ever seen people looking at you with pity, as if every word you utter were glass about to shatter? I felt it. And for a while even I started to doubt myself. The house became quieter, the air heavier. Every question I asked was answered condescendingly. Don't stress, darling. You're imagining things again. It's frightening how trust can be stolen when the thief is someone who claims to love you. But something inside me refused to die. There's a kind of instinct that only comes with age. A wisdom shaped by years of being underestimated, so I started writing everything down. Every date, every sentence, every call made while he thought I was asleep. And then came the night I found the document, my name, my date of birth, and in large letters, the expression mental incompetence. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the paper. For a moment, the world spun, as if even the ground had betrayed me. He had already signed. All that was missing was a medical report. One more lie, one more falsified report, and everything I've built, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every penny saved, would cease to be mine. Betrayal is colder than death. Because death at least is honest. Betrayal wears your perfume, speaks your language, and smiles at you while tightening the noose around your neck. That night, looking at those pages, something inside me changed forever. I could have cried, I could have screamed. But I just smiled. Because now I knew exactly what he was capable of, and what I needed to become. There comes a point where fear transforms into focus. Where a broken heart transforms into strategy. And while he thought he was studying my weakness, I was actually memorizing his mistakes. I folded those papers carefully, like someone folding a flag after a war. And I made a promise to myself. He would never see me break. Some call it revenge, I call it correction. But tell me, how do you destroy someone who still believes you're in pieces? After that night, nothing seemed familiar anymore inside that house. The walls, which once held our laughter, now echoed with a kind of silence that only exists where trust has died. He walked around with calculated steps, always polite, always kind, but with the look of someone who already knew he had won. I, on the other hand, began to learn the art of pretending. Pretending to be calm, pretending to be distracted, pretending that I still believed in him. It was curious to see how comfortable he felt believing that I was vulnerable. Men like him confuse patience with weakness. And it is in this mistake that their downfall begins. In the morning, the coffee no longer smelled of home, but rather of rehearsal. Each dialogue was a poorly rehearsed play. He would say what he thought I wanted to hear, and I would respond with what he needed to believe. While he pretended to care for me, I began to care for the truth. I started paying attention to the clock, the messages, the expressions. The way he avoided eye contact whenever I mentioned money. He underestimated the memory of a woman who had lived long enough to know that love doesn't disappear overnight. It rots, slowly, from the inside out. There was one day, however, when I almost gave in. I almost believed that I was actually losing my mind. It's strange how, when everyone doubts you, even your own voice seems to become suspect. It was at that point that I realized how much the real danger wasn't him. It was what he wanted me to believe about myself. The real blow wasn't against my money, but against my sanity. So I decided to turn the tables. I started writing down everything he said, but discreetly. People forget that silence is one of the most powerful weapons of those who have been underestimated. While he was speaking, I was taking notes. While he was plotting, I was preparing. While he slept, I read every hidden document, every detail of the plan that he thought was too perfect to be discovered. It was during this process that something within me reignited. The woman he tried to extinguish began to awaken, and the more I saw the extent of the lie, the more I understood that it wasn't just about me. It was about all the times women like me were treated as too emotional, insecure, unstable, simply because we dared to be suspicious. It was about the paternalistic gaze that tries to silence, the sweet tone that manipulates, and trust used as a weapon. I found myself facing a cracked mirror. On one side, the woman he wanted to convince was crazy. On the other, the woman he never imagined he would have to confront. And in that distorted reflection, I began to find strength. That's when I understood why so many people stay. Not out of fear, but out of hope that the other person will go back to being who they once were. But there are times when hope must die so that truth can be born. It was at that point that I felt the urge to leave a mark, that a small gesture, almost invisible, but symbolic. That's why so many people choose to stay here, following each revelation. Because they recognize in this type of story a piece of themselves, of their own silent battles. And while he slept peacefully, believing his plan was safe, I harbored something far more powerful than fear within myself. I kept the knowledge to myself. And knowledge, when born from suffering, becomes ammunition. But what he didn't know, what no one imagined, was that the real turning point was yet to come. And when she arrived, she wouldn't be noisy. It would be necessary. It's irreversible. The hours began to drag on in a strange way. Every minute inside that house felt too heavy, as if the air around me were made of glass about to shatter. I watched him in silence, trying to decipher the routine that had previously seemed so familiar. Now, every simple gesture, the way he arranged the papers, how he closed his laptop too slowly, how he looked at the clock before answering, everything sounded rehearsed. It was like watching a play whose script I hadn't read, but I already knew the ending. The nights were the worst. I would lie beside him, feeling the same mattress, but sleeping in a completely different abyss. He would breathe deeply, calmly, as if unaware of what he was carrying in his hands. As for me, I stayed awake, listening to the sound of my own thoughts. It was as if one part of me screamed to run away, while another, older part told me to wait. 'Cause I needed the right time. It was during one of those early mornings that I realized how much fear has a smell. It's the same smell of old paper, of dust accumulated in folders, of fresh ink on documents that shouldn't exist. A fear that clings to the skin and doesn't come off even with a shower. I smelled it when I found the second envelope, the one he had left on the table, forgotten, perhaps out of overconfidence. Inside, a copy of the will. His and mine. Except that mine wasn't mine. It was a rewritten, altered version, signed by hands that weren't mine. From then on, every conversation turned into a minefield. I smiled, he smiled. I asked something, he answered too quickly. Sometimes he would put his hand on mine, and I wanted to tear my skin off. Once a lie takes hold, even the touch of another person hurts. During the day, I began to realize how easily people believe what they want to believe. He kept saying I seemed confused, shaken, and I saw the veiled glances. The secretary spoke softly when I passed by. The gardener no longer greeted me with the same respect. It was as if an invisible shadow was being slowly drawn over me. And the more I tried to prove I was okay, the more they doubted me. That's when I understood. He didn't just want my money. He wanted me to collapse. Because for someone like him, destroying a woman from the inside is the most elegant way to steal everything she has on the outside. But he underestimated what time does to pain. What was manipulation to him became a lesson for me. I started seeing every detail as a clue. The way the phone rang and he left the room. The look he gave me when I picked up my purse. The way he avoided talking about the bank. Everything was a clue. Everything was a disguised confession. Sometimes I would find myself looking out the window, remembering how simple it was when all it took was trust. The sun would shine through the glass, and I would wonder, how many women have lived this same story in silence, swallowing their own fear to preserve a dignity that the other person didn't deserve? The answer hurt, but it also strengthened me. It was in this mixture of pain and clarity that I decided to act. Not with shouting, nor with threats, but with precision. I didn't know yet what it would be like, or when. But she knew that when the time came, he wouldn't have time to defend himself. The following night was different. I felt a kind of calm that I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't peace. It was preparation. And when he wished me good night, without realizing what I already knew, I responded with a smile. The same smile he would see for the last time before everything changed. Some say that silence is the refuge of the weak. But they don't understand. Silence is the breath of revenge before the first step. The next morning, the sun streamed through the window with an almost insulting calm. The house seemed the same smell of coffee, the same distant sound of the radio. But something inside me had already broken in a way that would never be whole again. He still smiled, still called me by my usual nickname, still pretended to care. But he was a bad actor on a stage I myself had built. And, for the first time, I saw how much he depended on my role in the play. As I watched him get ready for work, I realized his fear was greater than mine. He needed me to believe his version of events. He needed my surrender, my exhaustion, my collapse. Without that, the plan had no power. It was like a house of cards, held up by my silence. And that's when I decided to change the script. Gradually, I began to introduce flaws in the routine. Innocent questions at the wrong times. Small, deliberate forgetfulness. A firmer look when he expected submission. And each of his reactions was a mirror showing me the truth. He would get irritated, sweat, tremble. Not out of guilt, but out of fear of losing control. At those times, I would take a deep breath and let my gaze rest on him, without saying anything. It's amazing how powerful well-placed silence is. Silence can dismantle a liar faster than any shout. It was then that I realized how much power shifts when we stop reacting and start observing. I used to think that love was made of surrender. Today I know that true love also requires presence. Being awake, lucid, whole. That's what he didn't foresee. That I, the woman he tried to declare incapable, would be the one to unmask him with more precision than any lawyer. At night, I would sit on the porch, listening to the distant sound of cars, and think about how many times I had accepted less than I deserved in the name of peace. How many times I had confused silence with forgiveness. Perhaps that is why so many, upon hearing stories like mine, feel the urge to support this journey, leaving a silent sign that the message touched them. 'Cause, deep down, we have all been underestimated at some point. And while he believed he had me under control, I was already rebuilding my own territory. I reviewed contracts, spoke with trusted people, and learned more about the law than I ever imagined. Every word of his was now proof. Every gesture a piece I moved on the board. But the most surprising thing was discovering that the stronger I became, the less anger I felt. Hatred gave way to something different. An almost serene clarity. I no longer just wanted justice. I wanted closure. I wanted to look at him and know that the game was over, that the role he played for me no longer serves me. And it's curious how, when we reach that point, fate seems to conspire in our favor. A phone call, a slip-up, a conversation overheard halfway through, and suddenly, the thread of truth begins to unravel on its own. He didn't know it yet, but his mask had already begun to crack. I just needed to wait for the right moment for everyone to see. Revenge, when born of injustice, has its own timing. It matures in silence, grows in pain, and blossoms at the exact moment when the guilty party believes they are safe. And when that moment arrives, and it will, there will be no more disguises, excuses, or possible versions. Only the weight of what he himself had sown, returning like a shadow he swore he would never face. As the days passed, something inside me began to change silently, almost imperceptibly. The fear that had previously paralyzed me transformed into observation. And from observation, a kind of calm power was born, the kind of strength that doesn't need to be spoken, only felt. I walked through the house with light but firm steps. Each object, each drawer, each corner seemed to whisper secrets I wasn't ready to hear before. I remember the day I found the recorder. Small, discreet, hidden behind a frame. He probably left it there to test me. or to create false evidence of the instability he claimed I had. But, ironically, it was there that I found the first key. The first concrete piece that could turn the game around. Hearing my own voice on that device was a shock. I was talking to myself, yes, but not like an unbalanced person. It was a catharsis. It was exhaustion. It was loneliness. And yet, he intended to use that as ammunition. There was something cruel in realizing that someone who once said they loved you had dedicated so much time to planning your destruction. But there was also something liberating. Because in that instant, I understood that he didn't truly know me. He never had. He confused gentleness with weakness, calmness with submission, love with naivete. And now he would be a victim of his own illusion. I began to assemble my dossier in secret. Every falsified document, every suspicious message, every recording. I organized everything in a black folder, like someone preparing an invisible weapon. At night, while he slept, I reviewed every detail by the light of the bedside lamp, my heart beating to the exact rhythm of the contained revenge. There were times when I wondered if it was worth it. If I really wanted to reveal everything, or if simply knowing was enough. But all it took was remembering his gaze. That gaze that mixed pity and control, to understand that silence was no longer an option. The strangest thing is that, while I was growing stronger, he began to lose himself. His overconfidence made him careless. He started arriving late, forgetting what he had said, stumbling over his own lies. His mask didn't fall off all at once. It gradually crumbled like paint running down an old portrait. At dinner, I noticed he was studying me suspiciously. "You've been acting differently," he said, trying to smile. I simply replied that I was sleeping better. And it was true. For the first time in months, I slept with a clear conscience. Because now the weight of the lie was no longer on me. While he was engrossed in his own game, I was preparing the stage. I knew that when the time was right, there would be no need to shout, cry, or accuse. It would be enough to show. And what would be revealed would leave no room for doubt. Sometimes I would look at him and feel a strange mixture of compassion and contempt. Compassion for seeing someone so obsessed with control, unable to realize he was already losing. Contempt for knowing that the same man who tried to declare me incapable was, in fact, the weaker of the two of us. Outside, the world remained the same. The neighbors, the garden, the rustling of leaves. But inside that house, the balance had shifted. I had the evidence. He had the fear. And between us, the air grew increasingly thick, as if even the walls awaited the outcome. One night, I saw his reflection in the glass as he watched me from a distance. There was something different in his eyes. It wasn't the arrogant confidence of before. It was a flicker of doubt, of perception. As if, for a second, he had sensed the danger of being watched by someone he swore he dominated. It was at that moment that I realized the game wasn't just turning around. It had already turned around. And what would come next? He would never have been able to foresee. By then, everything inside me was silent, but not the silence of fear. It was the silence of an observer, of someone who understands that time is truth's greatest ally. I walked through the house as if walking on a razor's edge, aware that any misstep could ruin everything. And at the same time, there was a strange peace in knowing that the game was about to be revealed. Sometimes I would see him sitting at the table, his head bowed over the papers, and I would wonder at what point love had turned into a dispute. How could someone who once looked at me with tenderness now see me as an obstacle to be eliminated? Betrayal isn't just in the act. It's in the changing gaze, the cooling gesture, the calculated word. It's a kind of slow death, and perhaps that's why it hurts so much. One afternoon, I opened the safe he thought I didn't know how to open. Inside there was more than just money. There were fragments of what he called security. Hidden documents, forged signatures, transfer receipts. It was like opening the heart of a monster and finding not malice, but desperation. He needed my money, yes, but more than that, he needed to prove to himself that he still had power. I locked the safe without taking anything. True power is knowing you can destroy someone, and choosing to wait for the exact moment to do it. At night, The moon streamed through the window and streaked across the bedroom floor like a line dividing two worlds, his and mine. On one side, the illusion he still tried to maintain. On the other, the truth that grew silently. And in the middle, me, walking between light and shadow, learning to pace each breath so as not to let slip what was to come. It was during this period that I realized how fertile solitude can be. It's not empty. It's a space for preparation. Each day I remained silent. The plan grew stronger within me. I no longer needed proof. It was everywhere. What I needed was precision. He, on the other hand, began to show signs of instability. He confused dates, repeated phrases, and distrusted everyone. The man who accused me of losing my lucidity was now getting lost in his own words. It was like watching a mirror slowly invert. He spoke, and each syllable betrayed the weight of his own lies. One night, I woke to the sound of heavy rain hitting the roof. I went downstairs and found him in the living room, with a bottle of whiskey and his eyes fixed on nothing. The lamp cast a yellowish light on his face, and for a moment I saw what he really was. A tired man, corroded by his own poison. He looked at me, tried to smile, and said he was worried about me. I simply replied that I understood him perfectly. And I did understand. Because the mask he wore was too heavy, and now he was beginning to suffocate inside it. With every gesture, every word, I watched his castle crumble. Not noisily but slowly. And it is in this slowness that revenge becomes sweeter, because it doesn't come from impulse, it comes from certainty. But at the same time, there was something inside me that dreaded the moment of closure. Not for him but for myself. Because when justice is served, emptiness follows soon after. It's the price of regaining control. The feeling that something is ending, and with it a part of who you were. Still I knew. The end was coming. And when it came, there would be no screaming, no tears, no scandal. Only the dry sound of truth, falling to the ground like a key turning for the last time. After that night, everything began to move like a silent chessboard. Every gesture of his was an attempt to gauge me, to understand how much I knew, how far I could go. And I let him believe he was still in control. Feigning vulnerability is an art. And mine, at that moment, was perfect. I left small openings, calculated responses, pauses that made him doubt himself. It was like watching someone dig their own grave, and believing they're building a throne. The tension between us was no longer something that could be hidden. The words had become sharp, even the simplest ones. Breakfast was a minefield of glances and silences. And yet I remained calm. I needed him to believe he was still one step ahead, when in reality he was already many steps behind. One day, he called me to talk about our assets. He tried to sound kind, paternal, almost protective. I listened attentively, feigning gratitude, while each of his sentences became a veiled confession. He talked too much. It was always like that. Those who try to control end up betraying themselves through excess. It was during that conversation that I realized. His fear was no longer about losing the money. It was about losing the narrative. He wanted to decide how the story would be told, who would be the victim and who would be the villain. But this time he wouldn't have that choice. I already had the evidence, the plan, and the composure. And there is no more powerful weapon than a calm woman in the face of a desperate man. The following nights were long. I would sit on the balcony with a cup of tea, watching the wind rustle the curtains. And I would think about how many women, in silence, live similar stories. Tested, discredited, reduced to a convenient diagnosis. Sometimes I wondered if anyone had ever felt that same lump in their throat, that mixture of anger and clarity that transforms pain into strategy. Perhaps if you have felt this, you understand what I mean. He started making more serious mistakes. He sent emails to the wrong people. He mixed up dates on documents. In a final, desperate move, he tried to intimidate me with lawyers. But by then, I had already crossed the line of vulnerability. I wasn't reacting anymore, I was acting. And every time he tried to hurt me, it was as if he pushed me even closer to the truth. The contrast between us became evident. He increasingly agitated, aggressive, unbalanced. I increasingly centered, controlling the narrative with the patience of someone who knows the harvest season. And the more panic grew within him, the more the world around us began to notice. Employees whispered, friends distanced themselves. Even his tone of voice changed in public. The mask he had maintained for so long began to crack in the light of day. I remember the dinner where everything almost came to a head. The table set, the food served, the expensive wine. And him, trying to keep up appearances, smiling tensely, the glass trembling slightly in his hand. When he mentioned that I was getting better mentally, something inside me simply clicked. I looked at him intently without blinking and said only, "Maybe I was never sick. Maybe the problem was always you." The silence that followed was deafening. After that, something changed definitively. He began to fear me. He didn't say it, but I could see it in his eyes. It was the same look a hunter gives when he realizes his prey has turned his sights. And there's nothing more powerful than that moment. Every action has its reaction, every lie its comeback. And time, that invisible judge, began to act on my behalf. And although I hadn't yet shown everything I knew, fate was already taking care of preparing the stage. A stage from which he would never emerge unscathed. Perhaps if you had been there with me, you would have felt the same chill down your spine that I felt that night. The certainty that something big was about to happen. And ultimately nobody, no matter how intelligent, can escape the truth forever. The house began to breathe differently. Slower when I passed by, more tense when he entered. I perceived the small changes in the atmosphere like signs on a map. The chair he dragged with less care, the handkerchief left on the arm of the sofa, the echo of his words that went unanswered. Everything became material for my plan. Each of his careless actions was an opportunity. Each attempt at control, a new piece to be turned in my favor. I moved with intention. Sometimes I served the coffee exactly when I knew he would be reviewing accounts. Other times I left a document on display on the desk, as if I had forgotten it, when in fact I wanted him to notice my attention. It was a silent choreography. I wasn't seeking confrontation. I was seeking evidence. And precision became my most faithful companion. One day the phone rang with a new message. He smiled, his eyes relieved, thinking he had gained more time. I watched the shadow of his smile fade as he read. His expression changed. There was a sense of urgency now, the kind of urgency that betrays guilt. He began to make silly mistakes, copying wrong names, forgetting attachments. Panic does this to those who try to lie for too long. It transforms calculation into haste, and haste into error. Meanwhile, I found strength in small victories. An email mistakenly forwarded to a relative, an unconfirmed transfer, a signature that didn't match his handwriting. I gathered it all together with the patience of someone sewing an important dress. Stitch by stitch, without rushing, until the whole piece was finished. And when I looked at what I had put together, I felt a strange mixture. Relief, yes, but also a grief for the part of me that had to learn to watch so closely. Inside, everything seemed normal. The garden, the streetlights, the neighbors greeting me with automatic waves. But at work, the conversations changed tone. Colleagues who had previously smiled began to look with a different kind of caution, as if something hung in the air, burning their very skin. Rumors travel fast. The truth, when it starts to spread, drags many people to the same place. I realized that my story was no longer just mine. It was a mirror for other women who recognized themselves in my silence. There was an episode that sealed the conviction within me. He went to complain to a lawyer about my uncertainties, trying to paint a picture of an unstable woman. The lawyer asked questions that should have scared me. I answered calmly. My answers were short, deliberate, and each of my words sounded more coherent than his version. I saw the lawyer take notes, hesitate, and for the first time I felt the pendulum of this game swinging in my favor. Clear speech dismantles the rehearsed lie. Meanwhile, I could gauge his exhaustion by the way he held my gaze when I approached. It was the look of someone afraid of being exposed, not of someone in control. He began avoiding meetings with certain acquaintances, inventing non-existent gatherings, blaming exhaustion for every stumble. Arrogance gave way to an anxiety that seeped like water through cracks. And this anxiety worked in my favor. It left traces. It's curious to think how effort brings returns in unexpected ways. What I silently planted came back as small certainties in my heart. The feeling of having networks built, of not depending solely on my memory, but of having evidence that spoke for me. With each new document, with each reviewed recording, I felt less fragile and more methodical. One test after another, and the result was always the same. The firm truth, corroding the narrative he tried to maintain. I know all this sounds like tactics, and in part it is. But it's also a lesson. I learned that resistance doesn't have to be noisy. It can be meticulous, patient, strategic. I learned that when you put facts together, lies lose their power to convince. And I learned, more painfully, that trust can be regained in small steps, but the wound takes a long time to heal. Now I think about who is watching this story. If they've been through something similar, perhaps they recognize the chill of knowing they need to act without being seen. If they have any advice, let them linger on the thin line between what was and what is to come. Because I'm not finished yet. The stage is almost set. And when the curtains open, the reaction will be measured, precise, just as the truth deserves. Time began to drag on in a different way. Each day felt like a rope stretched too tightly, about to snap, and I walked on it with the balance of someone who couldn't afford to make a mistake. The tension came not only from the fear of being discovered, but from the awareness that everything was moving, even in the silence. It was like watching a storm brewing in the distance. You feel the air change before the first thunderclap appears. He wasn't sleeping well anymore. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed the exhaustion he was trying to hide. He began to isolate himself, working late at the office, and the sound of doors slamming throughout the house became part of my routine. I didn't provoke him. There was no need. The very weight of the lie did the work for me. On those long nights, I reflected on the path that had brought me there. I never imagined that justice could have such a slow and silent rhythm. I always thought that what was right triumphed with noise, with applause, but I discovered that sometimes victory comes disguised as patience. It is necessary to watch the enemy dissolve from within, and that takes time, the kind of time that only those who have been underestimated can wait for. One afternoon I found an envelope on the table. It was a document he had forgotten to put away, a copy of a power of attorney. My name was on it, forged. It hit me with the coldness of a blade. It was no longer just an attempt at manipulation. It was a crime. And yet I didn't feel hatred. Felt confirmation. The certainty that his plan was never about love, but about control. I carefully kept the paper, like someone holding sacred proof. I realized that destiny doesn't deliver truths all at once. It distributes them in doses, testing if we are ready to see. And I was. For the first time I felt I didn't need to rush. Haste is the child of fear, and fear no longer resided within me. Meanwhile, he was trying to rebuild his image in the eyes of others. He said I was distracted, that I needed support, that I was fragile. And the world, as always, believed the loudest voice first. But not for long. Because when the truth matures, it creates cracks in every lie that covers it. And I saw those cracks begin to open, discreet but visible. An old friend called me after months of no contact. She said she'd heard strange rumors, that something didn't add up. She asked if I was okay. For a moment I thought about denying everything, about keeping the secret intact. But my voice came out differently, firm, almost serene. I'm better than ever. Just observing. On the other end of the line, there was a respectful silence. She understood. The following days were marked by small upheavals. One of his employees resigned without explanation. An investor cancelled an important meeting. Loose ends began to surface, and I realized it wasn't just me seeing it. The universe was also moving, realigning what had been distorted. And in the midst of all this, I began to see myself in a different light. No longer as the victim, nor as the woman betrayed by greed. I was now the observer of my own rebirth. Every piece of evidence kept hidden, every word held back, every cold look I didn't return, All of this became part of a silent transformation. I didn't just want to prove I was right. I wanted to show, without saying a word, that nothing destroys those who learn to see in the darkness. There was still uncertainty, yes. I didn't know how or when to reveal everything. But the outcome no longer mattered so much. The journey to it did. Because sometimes power lies not in winning, but in remaining whole while the other falls apart. And when I looked at him that morning, when the sun seemed to hesitate between rising and setting, I understood that this was what was happening. The end was approaching, but it wasn't time to reveal it yet. The story was at its most tense, and silence now was my most lethal weapon. The truth began to move like an underground river, invisible on the surface, but growing stronger beneath the earth. I felt the ground vibrate beneath my feet, as if something were about to emerge. The balance between us silently shifted, and his every gesture now seemed like a poorly stitched disguise. He still tried to smile outwardly, but his gaze already betrayed a fear known only to those about to fall. There were mornings when I'd see him across the table, his cup trembling in his hands, and I'd realize how the control he thought he had was slowly dissolving. It was almost poetic to see how power shifts, without shouting, without confrontation. Just time, truth, and calm working together. I learned to respect this process, to accept that justice sometimes unfolds slowly, like light filtering through cracks before flooding the room. But deep down, there was a part of me that still wavered, because it wasn't just about winning. It was about what would be left of me after it was all over. Anger no longer moved me, fear even less so. What remained was a kind of cold lucidity, the realization that, even when someone tries to erase you, you can use the eraser itself to write a new story. One rainy afternoon, he rushed into the room, papers in hand, trying to appear in control. He spoke loudly, stumbling over his words, like someone needing to convince himself of his own lie. He said that things were resolved, that no one would believe me. I simply watched him. Raindrops beat against the window, tracing crooked paths across the glass, and in that repetitive sound I realized something simple. He no longer saw me. The character he had created, fragile, manipulable, had vanished before his eyes, and the emptiness that remained was his own reflection. In the following weeks, his reactions became predictable. He would raise his voice when cornered, then apologize with tears that stemmed not from regret, but from despair. I began to understand that moral collapse is not a single event. It's a sequence of cracks that spread until the weight of the lie itself brings everything down. And while this was happening, my mind expanded to places that previously seemed unreachable. I remembered who I was before all this, the woman who believed, who loved, who trusted too much. And at the same time, I felt a new version of myself being born, one who doesn't fear the dark because she has learned to see within it. It was as if I had crossed through a mirror and, on the other side, found myself for the first time. Contrasts accompanied me at every step. Sometimes I felt free, as if I had already won. At other times, the weight of waiting almost broke me. It's a strange paradox, knowing that victory is near and yet having to endure the silence before the final sound. But perhaps that's how strength is built, between impulse and restraint. One night the phone rang. On the other end, a formal, professional voice. It was confirmation that the documents had been received, analyzed, and understood. What would come next, I didn't know. But that moment was enough to feel the air change. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, slept without fear of waking up. Even so, the tension didn't disappear. It merely transformed. Now it was anticipation, the feeling of being on the threshold of something decisive. And as I watched the following dawn, I realized how much light and shadow intertwined within me. The clarity wasn't complete. The past still cast shadows, but they no longer frightened me. They were part of what had made me who I was. I still didn't know how it would all end, whether it would be public, brutal, or simply inevitable. But inside me, something was already resolving itself. Serenity is the ultimate stage of justice, and I was learning to inhabit it. The story wasn't over yet, but for the first time I was sure that the ending, when it came, would be mine. The day of truth arrived without warning. No unusual sounds, no change in the air. Just an ordinary morning, one of those that hide silent revolutions. I woke before sunrise, as if my body knew something was about to happen. The mirror reflected a serene woman, not vengeful, not wounded, just aware. And that awareness was what would most frighten those who tried to destroy me. When the call came, my hand didn't tremble. The lawyer's voice on the other end sounded calm, almost solemn. He confirmed what I already knew, but still needed to hear officially. The case was closed. All the evidence, the documents, the signatures, everything had been exposed. The attempt to declare me mentally incompetent had become proof of his own greed. He had lost everything, and I, for the first time, felt that there was nothing left to lose, only to live. There were no fireworks, no applause. Just a silence that hurt and healed at the same time. A silence of someone who finally understands that they don't need to prove anything to anyone. I left home and let the wind touch my face. The world seemed the same, but I was no longer the same. The fear that once held me back now pushed me forward, as if saying, "Go, the worst is over." When he learned of the decision, he tried to contact me. He sent messages, made calls, begged for conversation. But justice had already spoken, and time had done the rest. The man who once believed he could erase me with a stamp now begged to be seen. It's curious how power changes hands without the need for violence. The truth, naked and persistent, is enough. I saw him for the last time in a courtroom. There was no anger in me, no desire for revenge. Just a distant compassion, like someone watching a shipwreck from afar, knowing they tried to warn of the storm. He didn't look me in the eyes. And perhaps that was the most sincere gesture he ever gave me in his life. Gradually, the surrounding buzz dissipated. People returned to their routines, the comments lost their impact, and the story ceased to be news. But inside me, everything continued to move. Freedom has its own sound, discreet but constant. It's the sound of someone breathing without fear. I began to rebuild my life in small gestures. I renovated the kitchen, planted flowers in the yard, and started reading books again that had previously seemed too heavy. I rediscovered the pleasure of silence, of hot coffee, of a clear sky after the rain. I didn't need anyone to give me back what was mine, only the courage not to lose myself while I fought. Today I understand that the greatest victory was not proving my sanity, but preserving my essence. He tried to reduce me to a false signature, but I chose to expand in truth. And that's what I want to leave for those who come this far. There is immense strength in continuing to stand when they expect you to crumble. If this story touched you in any way, if at any point you saw yourself reflected in this mirror, perhaps it's because you know what it's like to be discredited, and yet not give up. That's why stories like mine need to be told, to remind us that dignity still has a voice. And if that voice has reached you now, leave your mark. Because that's how the cycle of strength renews itself, when one story awakens another. Today I hold no grudge. I hold on to memories. I hold on to the sound of my own breath when everything fell apart, and the soft glow of the morning when I realized. He tried to silence me, but he taught me to speak more truthfully. He tried to erase me, but he ended up revealing me. And what he tried to steal, my lucidity, my peace, my name, has transformed into something he can never possess, my freedom. And perhaps that's what I most wanted to say to those listening to me now. That the end is not punishment, it's liberation. That starting over is not a prize, it's a right. And that, in the end, life always gives back what was taken away. Not in the same form, but in the exact measure of the courage we had to continue to stay. Feel. And remember, those who tried to erase me only illuminated the path for those who will come after.